Let me tell you something most people won't tell you. Silence is loud, silence talks. Silence exposes more than words ever could. Some of you listening to me right now, you're staring at your phone. You're checking notifications every few minutes. You're replaying conversations in your head at 2:100 in the morning, asking yourself one question over and over: why hasn't he reached out? And let me be real with you, you've been fed a lie. They told you silence means he doesn't care. They told you silence means it's over. They told you silence means you should just move on. But I'm here to tell you something different. Sometimes silence doesn't mean what you think it means. Sometimes silence means he's breaking. Sometimes silence means he's losing control. Sometimes silence means the truth he's been avoiding is getting heavier by the day. Because here's the part most people miss: a man can avoid you. He can ignore calls, block texts, or disappear for days. But he cannot avoid how you made him feel. And when that feeling catches up with him, he won't stay silent. He will reach out. He will break the quiet. And when he does, he won't just speak. He will admit everything. That's the power of your absence, your boundaries, and your strength. When you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop trying to fix him, you give silence a chance to work its magic. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why he can't stay quiet forever, why he'll reach out, and why when he does, the truth will finally come out. A man uses silence to feel in control until it stops working. Let me say this slowly, because this is where most people get confused. A man does not go silent because he suddenly became calm, healed, or indifferent. Silence is not peace for him. Silence is a strategy. It is something he uses when he feels his position slipping, when emotions start rising in him that he does not yet know how to handle. For many men, control is safety. If he feels emotionally exposed, unsure, or vulnerable, his instinct is not to talk it out. His instinct is to shut down. Silence becomes the wall he hides behind, the shield that makes him feel like he still has the upper hand. When communication gets too real, when feelings are being discussed, when accountability is required, silence gives him breathing room. It allows him to avoid confrontation, avoid responsibility, and avoid admitting how deeply he is affected. In his mind, as long as he is not speaking, he is not losing. As long as he is not explaining himself, he is not vulnerable. As long as he is not responding, he believes he is in control of the situation. And in the beginning, silence works. It creates uncertainty. It makes the other person anxious. It forces them to overthink, to replay conversations, to question their worth. That reaction feeds his sense of control. But here's what he does not realize at first. Control that depends on your reaction is not real control. It is borrowed power. And borrowed power always expires. At first, he expects you to reach out. He expects you to ask what went wrong. He expects you to explain yourself again, to soften the moment, to make it easier for him to stay comfortable. Silence only feels powerful when someone is waiting on the other end. Silence only feels effective when someone is emotionally invested enough to chase clarity. So when he pulls back, he is watching. He is measuring your response. He is paying attention to whether you panic, whether you try harder, whether you lower your standards just to keep the connection alive. But something shifts the moment you stop reacting. When days pass and you do not chase, the silence changes its meaning. What once felt like control starts feeling like distance. What once felt like protection starts feeling like isolation. He begins to notice the absence more than he expected to. The quiet no longer feels like power, it feels empty. And that is when his mind starts working against him. The same silence he used to avoid emotion now gives him nothing but time to think. He starts replaying moments he dismissed, conversations he avoided, things he should have said but did not. Silence removes distractions, and without distractions, truth gets louder. He begins to realize that you are not just filling space in his life. You were adding stability, warmth, and emotional grounding, and now, without your presence, his sense of control begins to crumble. The reason silence eventually stops working is because emotions do not disappear just because they are ignored. They compound, they build pressure, and pressure always looks for a release. What he thought was emotional strength reveals itself as emotional avoidance. He feels unsettled, irritable, restless. He checks his phone more than he wants to admit. He rereads old messages. He wonders why the silence feels heavier than he expected. This is the moment when silence turns against him. Control loses its grip when there is no one left to control. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, the dynamic flips. He is no longer managing the situation. He is sitting inside it. And now he is the one feeling uncertain. Now he is the one questioning. Now he is the one wondering if he waited too long. That is when silence no longer protects him, it exposes him. It forces him to confront feelings he tried to bury. It makes him face the possibility that you might be moving on, healing, or finding peace without him. And that realization shakes him more than any argument ever could. Because a woman who stops reacting is a woman who is no longer available for emotional games. This is where silence reaches its limit. It cannot coexist with indifference. Once you detach emotionally, silence loses its power. And that is when he feels the urge to break it. Not because he suddenly became brave, but because the control he thought he had is gone. He reaches out because staying silent now costs him more than speaking ever did. Silence was never about strength. It was about fear disguised as control. And fear can only stay hidden for so long. When silence stops working, truth begins to surface. And once truth rises, it demands to be heard. He thinks about you more when you're quiet than when you're talking. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, especially if you are someone who loves deeply and communicates honestly. You are taught that speaking up keeps connection alive, that explaining yourself will bring clarity, that expressing your feelings will make someone understand your value. But the reality is, for many men, constant communication does not deepen reflection, it delays it. When you are always present, always explaining, always available, he does not have space to feel the weight of you. He experiences you in real time, but he does not process you. Men process emotions differently. They do not sit with feelings while they are happening. They feel them later, in silence, in absence, in moments when nothing is distracting them. When you were talking, when you were trying to fix things, when you were checking in, he did not have to think. The emotional work was being done for him. Your voice filled the space where reflection should have lived. Your efforts softened the impact of your presence. And because of that, he never fully felt what it meant to lose you. But when you go quiet, something changes inside his mind. Your absence creates a vacuum, and the human brain hates empty space. That silence forces him to fill the gap with memory, imagination, and emotion. Suddenly, moments he overlooked begin to replay. The way you listened, the way you showed up, the way you made him feel understood without him having to explain himself. These memories do not surface when you are still there. They surface when you are gone. When you stop talking, he loses access to your energy. And energy is what people miss, not words. He starts noticing the quiet places where your presence used to live. The pause before sleep feels longer. Certain songs feel heavier. Certain places feel incomplete. And without realizing it, his thoughts begin to circle back to you. Not because you demanded attention, but because your absence demanded reflection. Silence makes the mind curious. It invites questions that talking cannot. When you were explaining yourself, the focus was on the conversation. When you go quiet, the focus turns inward. He starts asking himself things he avoided before. Why does this feel unfinished? Why do I keep thinking about her? Why does this silence bother me more than I expected? These questions arise because there is no longer a voice guiding the narrative. The story is now playing in his head on repeat without interruption. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you stop reaching out. Your value becomes clearer. When something is always available, it feels unlimited. When it disappears, it feels precious. Your silence signals self-respect, not withdrawal. It communicates that you are no longer chasing understanding from someone who is not listening. And that subtle shift changes how he perceives you. You are no longer the one trying to be chosen. You become the one who chose peace. This is why silence often creates more emotional impact than words ever could. Words can be argued with, dismissed, or misunderstood. Silence cannot. Silence leaves room for interpretation, and the mind often fills that space with the deepest truths. He begins to realize that you are not just talking to be heard, you were offering connection. And now that the connection is gone, he feels the loss of it fully. Your quiet also removes emotional safety for him. When you were talking, he knew where he stood. Even if things were tense, there was still engagement. Silence removes certainty, and uncertainty makes people reflect. He wonders if you are moving on, if you are healing, if you no longer need him. The thought alone has more power than any argument. It forces him to confront the possibility of losing you, not emotionally, but permanently. What he thinks about in your absence is not just you, but what you represented in his life. Stability, understanding, familiarity, comfort. And when those things disappear without explanation, the mind searches for meaning. That search pulls his attention back to you again and again. Silence does not erase you from his thoughts. It places you at the center of them. And the longer the quiet lasts, the deeper the reflection becomes. Because while words may fade once spoken, absence lingers. And in that lingering space, he finally feels what your presence meant, not when you were talking, but when you stop. Guilt grows in silence, and men hate guilt. There is a feeling men try harder to avoid than sadness, confusion, or even heartbreak. Guilt forces reflection. Guilt removes excuses. Guilt exposes the gap between who a man believes he is and how he actually behaved. And silence is the environment where guilt grows the fastest. When everything is loud, when conversations are still happening, when distractions are present, guilt can be postponed. But when silence settles in, guilt has space to breathe. When communication stops, there is no longer anyone to blame, no argument to hide behind, no immediate reaction to soften the truth. Silence removes noise, and without noise, conscience gets louder. He starts remembering the moments where he could have shown up but chose comfort instead, the times he dismissed your concerns, the times he delayed honesty, the times he knew better but did less. These memories do not surface when someone is constantly reaching out. They surface when he is left alone with himself. Guilt grows because silence removes the ability to justify behavior in real time. When you were still talking, he could tell himself the situation was unclear, that things were complicated, that timing was off. But when you stop responding, those excuses begin to collapse. The absence of your voice becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, he sees his own role more clearly than he ever wanted to. He cannot rewrite the past when there is no one engaging in the present. Men hate guilt because it attacks pride. Pride allows a man to believe he is in control, that his choices were reasonable, that his actions were necessary. Guilt challenges that story. It whispers that he might have mishandled something valuable. It suggests that he may have taken your presence for granted. And nothing unsettles a man more than the realization that he was careless with something rare. Silence also removes emotional reassurance. When you were still there, even if things were tense, your presence offered him comfort. Your engagement meant he was still relevant. Silence removes that safety net. He no longer knows how you feel, and that uncertainty amplifies guilt. He wonders if you are hurt, if you are disappointed, if you have already let go. And because he cannot access your emotions anymore, his imagination fills in the gaps, often with regret. Guilt intensifies because it is tied to loss. It is not just about what he did wrong, but about what he might be losing because of it. He begins to connect his actions with consequences. He starts to see that silence is not punishment, but distance created by his choices. And that understanding weighs on him. He realizes that you did not disappear to manipulate him. You disappeared to protect yourself. That realization hits deeper than anger ever could. Another reason guilt grows in silence is because men are not taught to process emotions openly. They are taught to suppress, delay, and distract. But silence removes distractions. Late at night, in quiet rooms during moments of stillness, the mind replays unresolved experiences. He begins to feel the emotional residue of what was left unsaid. He remembers how you looked when you were tired of explaining yourself. He remembers the shift in your energy before you pulled away. These memories surface not to torment him, but to inform him, and information without defense becomes guilt. He hates this feeling because guilt demands action. It does not allow him to stay passive forever. It creates an internal pressure that builds over time. He may try to distract himself, to stay busy, to avoid thinking about it, but guilt is patient, it waits. And eventually, it reaches a point where staying silent feels heavier than speaking up. The longer the silence lasts, the more the guilt compounds, until it becomes uncomfortable enough to force a response. This is why many men eventually reach out with unexpected honesty. Not because they suddenly became emotionally fluent, but because guilt finally outweighed pride. Silence stripped away the excuses and left only truth. And truth is difficult to sit with when it involves regret. Guilt does not mean weakness, it means awareness, and silence is what brings awareness to the surface. When a man finally feels the full weight of what he risked losing, guilt stops being something he can ignore. It becomes something he has to confront. And confrontation often begins with a message, a call, or a confession, not to erase the past, but to relieve the pressure that silence allowed to grow. The moment you stop needing answers, he needs to confess. There is a powerful shift that happens the moment you stop needing answers from someone who once held emotional power over you. Needing answers keeps you emotionally available. It keeps you reaching, hoping, and waiting. It keeps the other person in a position where they still feel needed, still feel relevant, still feel in control of the narrative. When you are searching for clarity, you are unintentionally giving them leverage. And many men feel that leverage, even if they cannot explain it. They sense that as long as you need understanding from them, they still occupy an important emotional position in your life. But the moment you stop needing answers, the dynamic changes completely. Your silence no longer sounds like confusion, it sounds like resolve. It is no longer filled with questions, it is filled with boundaries. And that shift is deeply unsettling for a man who was comfortable being the one who withheld clarity. When you stop asking why, when you stop requesting explanations, when you stop needing reassurance, he loses his advantage. He no longer gets to decide when the truth is shared. He no longer controls the pace of emotional exchange. What replaces your need for answers is self-trust. You begin to realize that understanding someone's behavior does not require their permission. Their actions already told the story. Their silence already gave you information. And when you arrive at that realization, your energy changes. You are no longer emotionally leaning toward them. You are standing on your own emotional ground. And that independence is impossible to ignore. Men often confess not when they feel powerful, but when they feel the risk of irrelevance. When you stop needing answers, he senses that you may be emotionally closing a chapter without him. That possibility creates urgency. He begins to feel that if he does not speak now, he may lose the chance to be heard at all. And nothing pushes truth to the surface faster than the fear of being left behind emotionally. Your emotional detachment sends a clear message without saying a word. It tells him that you are no longer waiting for clarity to move forward. It tells him that you are capable of finding peace without his explanations. And that realization triggers something inside him. He begins to question whether he waited too long, whether his silence created permanent distance, whether his hesitation cost him a place in your life. These questions build pressure, and pressure demands release. The need to confess does not come from confidence. It comes from internal discomfort. When you were seeking answers, he could remain passive. Your questions gave him time. Your emotional availability gave him room to delay. But once that availability disappears, he feels the weight of unresolved truth. He knows there are things left unsaid, and now he feels responsible for the gap between what was felt and what was expressed. That responsibility is uncomfortable, especially when he realizes you are no longer asking him to carry it. Confession becomes a way to reclaim significance. By admitting what he avoided, he attempts to re-enter the emotional space he feels slipping away. He wants to be understood before he becomes irrelevant. He wants to explain himself before you fully detach. And while his confession may sound like courage, it is often driven by the awareness that the window to speak is closing. There is also a deeper layer to this shift. When you stop needing answers, you remove emotional pressure from yourself, but you place it on him. You no longer carry the burden of unfinished conversations. He does. The emotional weight transfers. And now he is the one sitting with unanswered questions, not about the relationship, but about himself. He begins to ask why he stayed silent, why he avoided honesty, why he assumed you would always wait. These questions are harder to ignore than anything you ever asked him. The irony is that the clarity you once begged for often arrives only after you no longer need it. When you stop chasing explanations, you create the space for truth to surface naturally. And when it does, it often comes unfiltered. Confessions emerge because silence has become too heavy for him to carry alone. This is why detachment is not manipulation. It is self-preservation. You are not withholding to provoke a response. You are releasing yourself from emotional dependency. And that release changes everything. It shifts the balance of power, not through control, but through acceptance. The moment you stop needing answers is the moment you reclaim your emotional authority. And when that happens, he feels the urgency to speak, not because you demanded it, but because your peace made his silence impossible to maintain. When he contacts you, he admits more than you expect. When a man finally breaks his silence, it rarely happens casually. It is not just a random message sent out of boredom, and it is almost never as light as he pretends it is. By the time he reaches out, something inside him has already shifted. The silence has done its work. It has stripped away distractions, inflated unresolved feelings, and forced him to sit with truths he avoided when you were still present. So when he contacts you, he is not starting a conversation. He is releasing pressure. Most people expect a simple check-in, a surface-level apology, or a vague statement like, "I've been thinking about you." But what often follows is much deeper. He begins to admit things he never had the language or courage to say before. Not because he suddenly became emotionally skilled, but because the weight of holding everything in has become heavier than the fear of being exposed. Silence has made his internal world louder, and now he needs relief. He admits confusion first. He acknowledges that he did not know how to handle what he felt. He may say he was overwhelmed, unsure, or scared of the depth of the connection. These admissions matter because they reveal that his silence was not indifference, but avoidance. He avoided the intensity of emotion because it challenged his sense of control. And now, with distance having clarified his feelings, he finally recognizes what he was running from. As the conversation continues, the truth deepens. He starts admitting mistakes without being prompted. He names moments he should have shown up differently. He recognizes the patience you had and the consistency you offered. This awareness does not come from external pressure. It comes from internal realization. Silence gave him time to see patterns clearly. He sees where he pulled away instead of leaning in, where he chose comfort instead of courage. And saying these things out loud is his way of acknowledging the gap between his intentions and his actions. What surprises most people is how much emotional honesty comes out once the wall breaks. He may admit that he underestimated the impact of your absence. He may say he did not think you would actually walk away. He may confess that losing access to you forced him to reevaluate himself. These are not small statements. They are reflections of a man confronting the consequences of his choices. And those confessions often come layered with vulnerability he never showed before. He also admits fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of commitment, fear of losing control. Men are rarely taught how to name these fears, so when they do, it means they have reached a point of emotional urgency. Silence removed the performance. There was no one to impress, no role to maintain. And in that emotional isolation, honesty became the only option left. What you are hearing is not just confession, it is exposure. Another reason he admits more than expected is because he senses that time has changed you. He can feel the difference in your energy. You are no longer reaching for reassurance. You are listening, not chasing. And that calm presence signals that you may no longer need him in the same way. This realization pushes him to speak fully, not partially. He knows that half-truths will not hold your attention anymore, so he opens up in a way he never did when he felt secure in your availability. These admissions are not always polished. They may come out messy, emotional, or poorly timed. He might struggle to articulate exactly what he feels.